Thanks, Dan. And as we've had more people join since we first started, I'll restate that my name is Matt Kruger. I'm the Executive Director of Wisconsin Land and Water. And if you're here for the County Conservation Meeting, you're in the right place. Before we welcome in Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, who's our keynote speaker, I'm going to take a couple minutes to provide a brief overview of what this event is all about, what we hope you'll take away from it, and provide a quick introduction to Wisconsin Land and Water as well. I don't have to tell all of you that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused disruptions on a scale previously unthinkable and has affected the lives and well-being of so many people. I'll ask too if whoever's has unmuted themselves, please mute themselves so not to distract everybody. I want to say that our deepest sympathies are with those who have lost loved ones or their jobs or have been affected in some other tragic or unfortunate way by our current situation. And so put into context, having to translate an in-person statewide gathering to a virtual event is really a luxury that we've been afforded, even if doing so has presented an unprecedented challenge for Wisconsin Land and Water as an organization. Typically, the County Conservation Meeting is an event that occurs twice a year, where County Conservation Department staff members and County Land Conservation Committee members converge, along with agency and nonprofit partners, to collaborate on pressing and timely conservation challenges, to celebrate successes, and maybe most importantly, to build community. We recognize and appreciate that by going virtual with this meeting, we are welcoming people who in all likelihood have never attended one of these meetings before, and our hope is that by the end of it, we will have grown our community as a result. As an introduction to those not familiar with Wisconsin Land and Water, we're a statewide nonprofit organization that represents and serves county conservation. So we provide trainings and professional development opportunities, we facilitate conservation standard development, we promote youth education, build partnerships, and we advocate for our members. And our members are Wisconsin's locally led conservation policymakers and professional conservation workforce that are located in every county across the state. We've previously been called the best kept secret in conservation, but we're sincerely hoping that events like this will eventually make that statement a thing of the past. We learned over the past year that many Wisconsinites are increasingly recognizing the valuable work that our members do. Governor Evers' Year of Clean Drinking Water highlighted the important role they play, and our members dutifully showed up at the legislature's Water Quality Task Force hearings and described from their ground level perspective the water quality challenges we face, but also the opportunities presented by practical conservation efforts smartly applied to the landscape. And it wasn't just our members who were singing the praises of county conservation at these meetings either. Our partners, many of whom are with us today, echoed this message. So much so that by the end of these statewide discussions, it was clear that providing adequate financial support to county conservation is one of the most sound investments that we can make in water quality as a state. And we're hopeful that that investment is made in earnest over the coming state budget deliberations. Wisconsin Land and Water's members work in partnership with landowners such as farmers, waterfront property owners to meet conservation standards while at the same time achieving their land management goals. This role is unique to them, and Wisconsin is unique to have such a skilled conservation workforce infrastructure at the local level across the state. In doing their work, conservationists are faced with a variety of natural resources challenges. They're on the front lines of efforts to build soil health, to protect against invasive species incursions, and to preserve farmland, just to name a few. Because the challenges they face on a daily basis have such serious consequences for our precious soil and water resources, we come together here at the County Conservation Meeting to collaborate, to learn, and to find solutions. County conservation professionals will feature prominently over this afternoon and tomorrow morning, and the agenda of this event intentionally provides resources for real-world and timely issues that are challenging local county conservation in the state. Some of those issues are implementing water quality standards, working to support producer-led watershed group efforts, accessing well water data, better understanding the fiscal implications of the pandemic for counties, and a subject that we don't talk enough about in these circles, but we very much need to, which is addressing racial equity and inclusion. Another topic that features prominently in our agenda, including in the selection of our keynote speaker, is climate change adaptation. Extreme weather events are affecting the landscape on levels that we have not seen before and all over the state. You'll be hearing about the science of the issue and how these events are impacting counties who are doing their best to adapt and to plan for this new normal. In what might be an indication of the times we live in, there is disagreement about climate change in some corners and skepticism about it, despite scientific consensus on the issue. From our perspective, over the past couple years, we've seen increasingly intense storm events occurring yearly all over the state. In fact, just yesterday, a storm dumped a whopping 5 inches over northwestern Wisconsin. We've seen floods washing out local infrastructure and damaging property. We've seen entire regions of the state declared disaster areas. Against the backdrop of all of this, it doesn't do us much good to squabble about differences in belief. We're much better served to address what's truly happening on the landscape around us and to roll up our sleeves and start working towards solutions. Which brings me to introducing our keynote speaker, Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. We're honored to have the Lieutenant Governor taking time out of his extremely busy schedule to make some remarks this afternoon. As many of you know, Lieutenant Governor Barnes chairs the Governor's Task Force on Climate Change, which is tasked with developing a strategy to mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change for the benefit of all Wisconsin communities. Lieutenant Governor Barnes was born and raised in Milwaukee and worked on public policy and social justice issues prior to being elected to the Wisconsin Assembly at the age of 25, where he served for 2 terms. In 2018, he became our state's first ever African-American lieutenant governor. In addition to his leadership on climate change, Lieutenant Governor Barnes uses his current platform of sustainability and equity to fight for solutions that invest in opportunities and fairness for every child, person, and family in Wisconsin, regardless of zip code. There will be a chance to submit questions, which will be done exclusively by using the chat box. Once Lieutenant Governor Barnes finishes remarks, I'll select questions in the order they're received, and we'll try to get through as many as we have time for, but probably not all of them. So without further ado, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes and remind him to activate his webcam and microphone prior to beginning his remarks. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me. It's an honor for me to be able to participate in today's event. And although obviously I wish this was something we could be doing in person, we have to deal with what we have. We have to recognize, understand, and respond to the science. And that's how we're making our decisions in the Climate Change Task Force. So again, I'm Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, and happy to be joining you virtually for the County Conservationist meeting. I want to start by thanking the staff at Wisconsin Land and Water and all the conservation leaders and fellow speakers who are adapting to the circumstances that we are still facing. As you all know, in early to mid-June, things were moving in a positive direction with regard to the COVID-19 crisis facing our state, and our daily new cases was trending downward. But unfortunately, over the last several weeks, we've followed with national trends, and now our daily new cases have been ticking back up. And on the 4th of July, we reported our highest ever daily increase with 738 new cases. So as I've been saying everywhere I go, I want to encourage, well, everywhere I go virtually, I want to encourage you, no matter where you are joining us from in the state, to please wear a mask when you go outside of your home and if you're going to be interacting with others, because wearing a mask is not a political statement. It is a statement of your respect for yourself and for your entire community. And it also demonstrates a commitment to stopping the spread of this virus and making progress and boxing it in so that our schools can open more safely in the fall and we can keep one another safe. Now, aside from COVID, I also want to thank the staff for your work to organize this event and all the work that you and everyone tuning in does 365 days of the year to move us toward our common goal, preserving our Earth's natural resources and promoting clean and healthy land and water systems. And Wisconsin Land and Water provides a crucial service in providing training, promoting youth education, building partnerships, and facilitating conservation standards for the 450 Land Conservation Committee supervisors and 350 conservation staff that you all serve in all 72 counties. And by bringing all these people together for meetings like this to discuss new ideas together under one roof or under one Zoom link, as we've all become accustomed to now, we're making progress on that goal. And I'm going to give a little bit of an update about the climate work in our task force, because in the last year and a half as your lieutenant governor, I've been focused on 2 core principles of equity and sustainability. That means that we have to look at how we maintain the health of our environment, our water sources, and our air. But we also have to look at who gets access to a clean environment, that clean water and that clean air, as well as who doesn't. And with all of your help, we're doing everything that we can to prioritize these principles and taking the state in a new direction on issues of water and other environmental environmental issues. Our administration has been committed from day one to embracing the science and calling out the reality of our changing climate. We started by rejoining the U.S. Climate Alliance and vowing to uphold the Paris Climate Agreement. Then last summer, Governor Evers signed Executive Order number 38, which created the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, which set the goal of ensuring that all electricity consumed in our state is 100% carbon-free by 2050. And in October of last year, Governor Evers created the Task Force on Climate Change. and entrusted me to serve as chair as we collect guidance on combating the climate crisis and transitioning us to a more just and equitable and a clean economy. And we've been able to bring together a diverse group of people to serve on the task force, representing Native nations, the business community, agriculture, utility companies, labor groups, and other industries and communities from all corners of Wisconsin. And over the last year, or last half year, the task force has been hard at work, meeting on a variety of issues related to the climate and how it impacts our communities. Our task force meetings have been used as a time to formulate and discuss potential policy recommendations and also learn more about a variety of issues ranging from environmental justice to transportation to energy use and conservation. So I encourage everyone to take a chance to look at the task force website, which is climatechange.wi.gov, to see a schedule of future meetings and consider joining us to observe the work that we're doing. And there's also a public comment period at each meeting. And speaking of public comment, the recent focus of our task force has been hosting a series of virtual listening sessions. And I'm proud of the diversity of our task force members, but they can't do this work alone. The task force itself cannot do this work alone. Input from the public is vital to help us develop the policies that reflect the will of the people and that are informed by those who are being the most impacted. And we've held three listening sessions so far, and the fourth one is actually tonight at 6 p.m. if you have a moment to stop by. And we'll be focusing on agriculture, land use, conservation, and food systems. Our last listening session will be next week on Wednesday, July 15th at 6 p.m. But people and organizations can submit comments and recommendations to the task force at the same website, climatechange.wi.gov, till July 31st. And I'm happy to announce that we've had over 100 people attend each session. And we've heard from diverse voices, including presentations from Black-led organizations like Groundwork Milwaukee and presentations from Indigenous conservation leaders as well. And of course, we've been hearing the thoughts, concerns, and recommendations of those who are attending. And so far, people have raised concerns about groundwater pollutants, extreme weather, flooding, and our society's reliance on fossil fuels. They've also called on elected officials to act, to invest in renewable energy and job training programs so that Wisconsin has the green infrastructure that it needs to be a thriving and healthy state. And most importantly, we've heard from citizens who are calling for environmental justice and asking that we include the communities most impacted by climate change in all of our conversations as well as our solutions. And after July 31st, the task force will take all the research and policy discussions we've been having and consider all the input that we've received from the public to form concrete recommendations for the governor to act on. And setting these goals and doing this work, it isn't about feeling good or being on the right side of history. It's about preparing for our state's future and the future of the generations to come. So if we want to create a state that is equitable and sustainable and truly a great place to live and work for everyone, we have to start charting that path to meeting our clean energy goals and improving the environment today. And if we want to be a global leader in environmentalism, we need to diversify the resources used to meet the state's energy needs and create a green economy with families supporting jobs. And if we want to ensure that we don't repeat the harms of the past and work towards undoing the harms of today, we must embrace environmental justice in all of our climate work. We have centered environmental justice as the work of our task force, and we've been intentional in including low-income communities, communities of color, especially Indigenous communities, as they have been the original stewards of the land and water and hold the knowledge of how we solve these problems effectively. We've also had geographic diversity in the people in the task force and the people that we've engaged with, from rural farmers to urban agriculture groups, and we've discussed the impacts of systemic racism in all these areas. And we found that environmental justice looks different everywhere you go. It could be air pollutant disproportionately impacting Black and brown communities, or a 100-year flood, leaving a farmer with nothing to fall back on. Monroe County Climate Change Task Force meeting and flood and damage. I had a chance to visit Monroe County and their Climate Change Task Force meeting to discuss flooding damage. And as Lieutenant Governor, I've spent the last year seeing the unfortunate and sometimes deadly impacts of severe flooding in communities throughout our state. And in February, I attended a meeting again of the Monroe County Task Force on Climate Change, and I got to hear firsthand and see the areas that were damaged, all the infrastructure, breached dams from the 2018 flooding event. It was devastating to see that damage still present, but it's important to have a glimpse of how climate change is directly impacting people's well-being, the health and economy right here in Wisconsin. And we've had too many major flood events in communities across Wisconsin since then, and there's no sign that flooding is going away anytime soon. And this trip to Monroe County intensified my own understanding of how much support communities really need in our state to be able to take on these challenges and to be resilient. And it highlighted the need for all of us to adapt our everyday practices to prevent more climate disasters, just like we've adapted to the pandemic. And we do desperately need counties to be putting in the work now to address climate change and start planning for the future. Otherwise, we may not have much of one. That means we need every county to be a part of the conservation movement and become a leader by implementing and advocating for the policies to protect, preserve, and enhance our natural resources for all future generations. And we have to work to change policies at the state level to ensure that local communities have all the resources they need. That means giving municipalities back local control. We need to repeal the state level preemptions that keep counties and local governments from implementing stronger stormwater retention policies and other environmental regulations that they need to be successful. The reality is we need every decision maker at every level ready, willing, and empowered to fight the climate crisis with every resource available, in addition to every fiber of our being. But in doing that, we have to recognize, as I've already stated, that the impacts of climate change have often had harsher impacts on low-income communities and communities of color, as well as our state's indigenous communities. So not only must every county work to include these recommendations in this work, we have to listen and we have to follow the lead of those who've been on the front lines. Our solutions have to help everyone, especially our most vulnerable communities. And the work that you're doing to understand these issues and educate about them will help to serve as a foundation for our next steps towards a more sustainable and equitable state. So thank you for your participation in today's event. Thank you for having me. And thank you for everything that you have done and the things that you will continue to do to protect our land and our water for future generations to come. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor, for your thought-provoking comments and for joining us today, especially joining us live. We're honored to have you here. I know that we have some questions that are going to be coming in, but I'm going to use the moderator's bully pulpit to ask you the first one, if you don't mind. Obviously, this pandemic has stressed and will continue to stress our state's limited resources for really an uncertain period of time. But as we all know, these issues that you've discussed and that we work on, that our members deal with day to day, aren't going to go away, and they're only going to get worse. So against the backdrop of competing demands for resources, how does our group specifically ensure that Wisconsin continues to keep critical investments made in conservation? Do you have thoughts, advice on that, and how we can advocate for that against these other competing demands?
Absolutely. And you gave a brief part about my bio, but the part that came before serving the state assembly was my time as an organizer. And I think that organizing solves issues. And oftentimes it's a long, drawn out process. It's not fun and it's not easy, but it's necessary. And here you have the power of so many people from different parts of Wisconsin who are all advocating the same issues. And with that said, it's important to engage our legislators about the importance of making sure that we are leading and making conservation, or that they are making conservation-minded decisions for the future. And I think sometimes that gets lost on people, but this sort of meeting here shows the power that you all have. It shows the reach that you all have as well. And as you use the bully pulpit here to ask the first question, I think that you all have an opportunity to use the bully pulpit, but with numbers, with substantial numbers and a substantial presence across Wisconsin to make a real difference.
Great, thank you. One of the questions that was submitted to me through the chat box, and just to restate to everybody, please use the chat box for submitting questions, and we'll just pick them up from there and present them to the Lieutenant Governor. One question came in. There was a question about whether or not you saw a difference in public engagement and comments with the virtual climate meetings versus the Speaker's Task Force. We know that you weren't on the Speaker's Task Force. That was a legislative effort. But if there was any difference between the two in engagement, and if there's any parallels that you see between the two that can help with policy making, basically.
Yeah, I wish that I could speak to the Speaker's Task Force. The Speaker put out, his was, after the governor declared the year clean drinking water, the Speaker took it up as an issue, but I didn't have a chance to participate in those hearings. I know that the work in this task force is a little bit more broad, but certainly inclusive of water quality issues. So I unfortunately am not able to speak to the parallels or the differences.
Great. Just checking the chat box here to see if there's any other questions. A reminder that you can use the chat box to ask questions to the Lieutenant Governor. I'm curious, in your work with the Climate Change Task Force, obviously one of the challenges that the issue of climate change, it affects people differently depending on their region. People in southeastern Wisconsin are going to be affected differently from people in southwestern versus central Wisconsin. It kind of manifests itself differently. I'm just curious what those discussions from the people that are sitting on the task force have looked like with these kind of disparate communities that maybe don't normally connect on other issues, or at least geographically, come together when they're all impacted so differently, but around this big overarching issue. It has to be kind of a challenge to navigate that. And I'm just curious how you facilitate those discussions and shared learning from each other as people are sharing their experiences on how it affects them.
Yeah, that is a really good question. And, like to think that we're unfortunately all united under this cloud. As we know, water issues are plaguing each part of the state, no matter where you are, whether it's flooding, whether it's, historically high lake levels, or historically or rapidly warming lake temperatures, or stream temperatures for that matter. But we set up these the listening sessions in a way. I'm not sure if anybody on the call had a chance to go to any of the governor's budget listening sessions, but we didn't want it to be where somebody just comes up to a microphone, speaks their piece and goes to sit back down while someone takes notes. We wanted to be a little bit more active and engaging, interactive, I should say, so that we can, have conversations and, sometimes come up with solutions within the group. So we do a couple presentations at the beginning, and then we have 3 breakout rooms, virtual breakout rooms, of course, where people are divided up evenly and are able to converse amongst themselves with a moderator in each of those rooms. I pop in each room. I spend about 20 minutes in each one of the things. They last about an hour, that portion of the meeting. And, that gives us the opportunity for people to, find commonality where they didn't think they had it. Somebody from Monroe County, for example, could be talking about the same exact thing for somebody in Racine County. And, a lot of this work, too, is to help us build a more united state of Wisconsin, because, there are so many things that folks try to use to divide us, but the issues that plague us, we won't ever solve unless we go at them together.
Absolutely. A couple more questions that are coming up here. There's a question about whether the governor will be including in his budget. Obviously, that's not developed yet, but assuming that the foundation's being laid for it anyway, whether the governor will include in his budget any of the task force recommendations that came from that legislative task force that kind of got preempted by or stalled by the pandemic, really. Specifically, the question, as you might expect from our crowd, is whether there was a specific bill that increased the funding allocation for county land and water staff, conservation staff. Just have you given any thoughts to those things yet, or where is that in the process?
Right. So the task force won't begin to finalize recommendations until after July 31st, after we've received the very last piece of input from the public. And I can't, speak to what the governor's budget is going to look like next year. As you know, sadly, there are some adjustments that are going to be made. So I wish I could get out there and commit to the governor to something. I'm not able to do that, especially not at this moment. But people here, you are able to submit those recommendations on the website. I'll say it again: it's climatechange.wi.gov. And as we know in organizing, the way to help move an issue is, a higher volume of people saying the same thing. It definitely helps. So if you're here now, if that's, if you are passionate about, which you certainly are, about increasing funding, don't let that conversation stop here on this webinar. Submit that recommendation to the task force.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And we did post the website link in the chat box so people can find that and post comments there. There was a question about if you have any thoughts on how we can get the Clean Water Task Force that the legislature had that kind of did the state tour last year in 2019, whether there was the bills that kind of got advanced from them kind of stopped at the Senate. And obviously, again, you're not in the legislature anymore, but any ideas on how we can get a little more traction on those bills? Any, maybe wearing your hat as a former legislator, we felt like we were a pretty high priority, and there was a lot of support for it, and just kind of the brakes got hit on it. So I know there's a lot of people that are interested in kind of rekindling that discussion. Do you have any insights or advice?
Yeah, the brakes got hit on a lot of things, unfortunately. In the Senate majority leader found himself a little bit busy, running for Congress. But I think that we'd be selling ourselves short if we didn't, communicate the need for us to advance those bills to the Senate majority leader's office. I think that I can't speak for you. I don't know how much contact has been made to his office, but that just means there needs to be even more contacts made to his office. And this is certainly something to organize around and ask why. Ask why hasn't there been why hasn't there been no movement? And there will be a number of avenues for that sort of feedback to be presented to him in his office.
Yeah, great. And I know that's something that we're going to be looking at, kind of gearing up to do shortly. So thank you for that. If you still have time to ask you a few more questions, is that okay, Lieutenant Governor?
Yeah.
There's a question about how the state of Wisconsin can advocate for stronger action on climate change at the federal or even the international level. I think it's an acknowledgement that obviously this isn't, it's an issue we feel locally, but obviously it's a global issue. And any of your discussions on the Climate Change Task Force or work on that provided any insights there?
Yeah, I mean, so the focus of the task force is purely at the state level. But, just last year I had a chance to attend the UN Climate Conference, the COP25 in Madrid, and I got to meet with a number of, global leaders on climate change. I got to present a number of times as well and talk about the things that we're looking to do. A lot of people look at the United States, rightfully so, as a nation that has been abdicating its responsibility to addressing climate change. And, my response was, yes, very unfortunate. We long for the day when we can once again have a nation that is committed to addressing climate change. But until that day comes, states are going to have to take up the mantle and get to work individually. And it won't provide us necessarily with the direction that we so desperately need right now. However, you do have some of the largest states in the country, the states who are part of the U.S. Climate Alliance, account for over half the United States population. So there's a chance for us to still be impactful. But directly on the federal level, the same way that we are engaging the same way that we should be engaging our state legislators and state legislative leaders, we have to do the same things with our members of Congress. And also, just looking at the compounded crises that we're dealing with that COVID-19 has brought us, the climate crisis was already there, but now we're going to be in an economic crisis. And it's as the issues with healthcare in America have been revealed more now than ever. I think we have to think bold in the way that we address healthcare in America. We also have to be bold in the way that we address the climate and the jobs crisis. This is time for us to be more bold than we've ever been. That means updating our critical infrastructure, our water infrastructure, modernizing our public transportation infrastructure, putting people to work. There's an opportunity for us to totally transform this country. And I honestly don't think there's an alternative, given where we are, historic, high unemployment. We still had over 1 million people file unemployment claim for the first time in America this past month, or just this past week, or excuse me, this past month. But that just means that we look at the opportunities that we have where we are failing in terms of the environment and put people back to work, right? We can spend money to retrain people. And, folks always ask, how you going to pay for it? Well, there was already a stimulus package that was just passed. And you saw, unfortunately, the same actors who benefited from that, from the stimulus package, from the CARES Act. And now there's, talk of another package passing, the HEROES Act passed the House. Who knows what's going to happen in the Senate? But if they drop that, that gives us a moment to say, well, look, we need to get this right. And I think the HEROES Act did account for a lot of what we were looking for in the first round of funding. But there's still so much more to be done, and the money is there. If they found the money to pass the first one, the money's there to do it again, and to put people and actually revive our economy, not just put a Band-Aid on it, but to actually do the surgical procedure that's necessary to revive this nation.
Thank you. If you have time for one more question, I think this will be our last one for you. And this question, I think, comes from the current moment we're in as a country around reckoning with issues of race and diversity. And it's something that we have on our agenda tomorrow morning that as an organization we're reckoning with too. But the question is if you have any ideas or thoughts about how to build diversity in our conservation workforce, which I think, I don't have demographic data, but I think it's safe to say is probably not very diverse right now.
A lot of it is having conversations with people. I was reading one of the local papers. I was just looking around to see if I could find it. Hyper local, as in a community, as in a neighborhood paper. I want to say Northside News here in Madison, and it had a picture of these 3 or 4 young high school age boys who were doing a lake cleanup, and they were addressing PFAS contamination. And when I saw it, I thought, man, this is incredible. That these kids are out here, one, recognizing the threat of PFAS contamination, 2, spending their weekends cleaning up a river. And I think about myself, and that's not what I was doing when I was in high school. So they're on a much better trajectory than I was at that time in my life. So I made it a point to reach out to them. And I made it a point to contact them. And yesterday we had a little Zoom meeting where I got to, I just want to thank them for the work that they were doing, because, those aren't always the people who are reflected in environmental work and climate activism. And I didn't want them to think that their work was going unnoticed. And hopefully I encouraged them to keep it up. And I also told them that the work that they're doing is for the next generation, and maybe one day it will be them, thanking some high school kids 20 years down the line for the work that they're doing. And so it's happening, and some of it is population related, right? Our Black population stayed at 6.5%, Latino population 6.5%. So to a certain degree, it's an issue of numbers. But there are people who are out there doing the work, people who want to do the work. And I think that one of the biggest opportunities we have is looking at who gets impacted the most by climate change. When these issues of water contamination, when these 100-year storms pop up and leave communities devastated, I think that in those moments, and you never want to see it happen. I wish that we could avoid those instances, but unfortunately, that's not the reality right now. But in those moments, I think that we can either seek out the heroes or see heroes emerge and bring them in, especially people who don't always make the direct connection to climate change. They just know that something bad happened, but don't necessarily know what got us to that point. And if we can engage people in conversations, I think that we can help develop new climate leaders.
Thank you very much for your answers and for engaging with us. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have to take questions. So I don't know what the appropriate way to engage in a Zoom round of applause is, but I'll just thank you, and somebody can tell me afterwards if you click little buttons or something. But want to thank you. Oh, there we go. I'm seeing it. People do know how to do it. I'm seeing some applause. So thank you very much. Now we're going to have a 10-minute break before we move into our first breakout sessions at 1:25, or a 15-minute break, sorry. And so just to kind of explain how that's going to work, because this is our first kind of breakout. Coming up next at 1:25, we're going to have the local strategies for climate change, which will start in this room. So you don't need to do anything with your links. It starts in this room at 1:25, and folks who want to attend that can remain in this Zoom meeting room if you're interested in that session. The other concurrent session addressing climate change with natural and working lands will be starting in room B. So find the appropriate Zoom link for your session. There's a virtual agenda that I believe is posted. It was just posted in the chat box. It says the virtual agenda at a glance, and that'll allow you to navigate to these meetings. So pull up the agenda just like you click the link to get into this one. Just click the corresponding link for the session you want to get to. That concludes our keynote session. I want to thank everybody for joining us with this county conservation meeting. We'll continue to talk through the next 2 days, and I want to encourage everybody to have a wonderful summer and to stay safe. So we'll see you all at 1:25. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.